He's had a high-flying career in the Air Force and represented our military interests to NATO. It's given him a keen understanding of both domestic and international threats. My conversation with retired Brigadier General Blaine Holt starts right now. Welcome to Conversations. My guest today was a combat C-17 commander in the U.S. Air Force and served as our deputy military representative at NATO. I'm honored to have retired Brigadier General Blaine Holt join me today. Welcome.
Madam Ambassador, it's great to be with you today.
Well, we're just so happy you made the time, or able to make the time. I know you're an expert on international affairs and global threats, but I want to start off closer to home and discuss the current status of our military. Are we where we need to be as it relates to our own national defense? And if not, where do we need to prioritize?
I think that it's the core question we should all be asking is, are we safe, and are we building the military to keep us safe for years? We do have the world's greatest equipment. We have the best technology, and we have incredible forces. But really, we've got to focus on what's happening with our people right now. If we go back to Kabul, we look at the vax mandates. If we look at this new emerging woke culture that seems to be dividing our forces against each other, from traditional versus very, very different views. This is where I have serious concerns about the military we're fielding for tomorrow.
You spent a lot of hours in the air as a pilot, and I'm curious, in this age of sophisticated drones, do we still need pilots inside the planes on combat missions, or do we make better use of our personnel by keeping them on the ground where they can operate planes remotely?
So we're in a transition period in all of aviation history. Eventually, we will probably see most manned aircraft systems, most pilots coming off of flight decks. But we're not there yet. We're certainly not ready for that. And I doubt you'd want to pick your favorite first class ticket only to know that the computer in the front said bad commander found. You might be praying for that old crusty airlifter to go take you someplace. But it's very, very clear that the technology will one day replace manned aircraft, and we're all prepared for that in the military. But right now, we see very effective use of robotics and drones where they're most effective in the battlefield, or even first responder work here at home with firefighting and the like.
The Ukrainian people have been pretty resilient against Russia's unprovoked assault. How much longer do you think conflict can continue?
Well, for the Ukrainian people, every single day is a day they're fighting for their national existence. And we see from some of these liberated towns, thank goodness, that the stories the people are telling are not stories where the citizenry have engendered themselves to the Russians, even if their mother tongue is Russian. I tell everybody, if you want to understand what the Ukrainians are up against and how long they'll get to the place where if there's no more weapons left, they'll just simply throw rocks at those tanks. Nancy, it's like as if we were in 1776 and we were fighting for our own survival here at home.
Mm-hmm. It really has been amazing in many ways, good and bad, to watch. Russia's actions have global repercussions on the food chain because Ukraine has traditionally been a major source of grain exports. How big of a concern to you is food security, and who stands to suffer the most from this?
So this is, in my view, sans nuclear weapons, probably the biggest negative outcome we're going to see out of this war. You know, Russia and Ukraine combined equate to about a third of the grain stocks in this world. And the planting certainly hasn't gone in Ukraine as it should. And we've seen stolen grain supplies. We've seen interdicted grain supplies. We've seen the Russians actually burn fields filled with food that should be eaten in Africa and is already spoken for. The population most at risk from this war is going to be in the Middle East, and it's going to be down Africa, right on down to Cape Horn, or Cape Town, South Africa. We're already seeing the effects. There have been thousands lost to famines in sub-Saharan Africa now as a result of this.
Oh. And for those of us who have been there or work there, you can only imagine the scope of the tragedy of that. But along with food security, the energy industry is also impacted by the war. Is Europe doing a good job managing the shortfall, do you think?
I wish they were. I really wish they were. They vastly underestimated how the Russians would play this and what it meant when they embarked on those sanctions. You know, back in the springtime when winter was so far away and energy was still
Hmm.
relatively cheap, they really embarked on these strong sanctions against Russians and said, proclamated, we will not be on Russian gas by the end of the year. And we're already seeing the effects on European citizens who are looking at many hundreds of times increases in what it's going to take to warm them. And the other effect of this is going to be just on industry. We're seeing Germany shut
Hmm.
down lines, production, and I think this is just the tip of the iceberg because the Russians, if you look at recent news, they've had the problem with these two pipelines, and we don't know how that problem has
Hmm.
manifested itself yet. It's going to be very, very difficult now for Europe to have anything other than an economic disaster from this.
And you know better than anybody, you've served as our deputy military representative at NATO. How do you rate our allies' response to Russia's aggression?
It's a mixed bag, you know, and we saw this when I was serving there 6 years ago, and Crimea had just fallen. We see in the
Hmm.
East where they're very sober and very clear-eyed. You know, your old post in Hungary, they know exactly what they're up against with the Russians.
Hmm.
But then in Western Europe, they see more complications. They see Russian energy deals. They see the refugee crisis in the South as big deals. And so now we have a Europe that may be on the brink of fragmenting in terms of its unity because of these differences of priorities.
Hmm.
And at NATO, it couldn't be more
Hmm.
important that the leadership of the General Secretary comes to bear because not everybody is supporting this war at the same level as the other, even though the rhetoric
Hmm.
is saying something else.
I think you're so right about the instability that could happen. So much has happened really in Europe, and the stabilization and the destabilization, and Putin seems to have overplayed his hand by instigating this conflict, and he appears to be doing some damage control by meeting with leaders of China, Iran, and Turkey. When we come back, we're going to see what the future may hold for Putin and how it might impact us here at home.